Another game jam started and another game jam finished. But how did we do this time? Well, you'd know if you just watched the video we made previously. But if you want to see the process of Dennis and I trying to show our idea of what love is from the perspective of a pair of untouched lizard people, stick around and find out as we attempt to create a point-and-click puzzle romance. Let's go. Pre-game jam preamble. This jam went a little different from usual. While we didn't work on our project in the few days leading up to the game jam proper, we were told the theme a few days early as we were doing it online. Since we weren't really in the place to meet up with a few hundred strangers in a packed room due to a certain global situation you're probably aware of if you've been alive for the past 2 years, which honestly isn't a given at this point if you look at our subscriber to viewer ratio, but I digress. The theme we were working with was duality, and what I took from that was the idea of two opposite things playing off one another. Despite learning the theme early, it still took until about a day before the game jam for us to actually feel inspired by an idea, and since I was feeling particularly sappy and emotional that week, I had romance on the brain, and wanted to try and have a go at something with a bit more heart, because after all, I'm human too. And even if I'm just a triple Z-list niche nano celebrity, I hope that a few of you can find it in your hearts to build a parasocial relationship with me like you might with the big E celebs. You and I have something special that can only be expressed through you liking the video, so please don't disappoint me. Emotional guilt tripping aside, what's a better and more relevant love story for the current age than a long-distance relationship? I'm sure a lot of people know the feeling of pining after someone through a screen, unable to touch them and yet still warmed by their incorporeal presence, even if it's just Joker from Persona.
That was sexy.
And this should be extra relevant, as after all, this video is coming out on Valentine's Day. So, we decided on a romantic point and click at this point, mostly because I should only have to draw a few assets with no animation because I am not in the mood for that. The blueprint is as follows. There are two sides of the screen, with two characters in different situations, but the issue is, they're both in a bad spot, as they're lacking a few respective things that the other can give them. This is where the duality idea kind of comes from. The idea that we went with was that the girl is stuck in the pouring rain outside, far from home, and the boy is stuck inside in a bit of a depressive slump. But through you finding the relevant objects in the opposite person's scene, you can make their lives just a little bit brighter. A bit of a metaphor on how even if they're not around each other, the things that remind them of each other have an impact on their respective lives. So, since I had the clearest idea of the girl scene, I started with all of her art assets first, working on her standing in a street as it's getting dark, looking incredibly out of luck. I went for a unique choice this time in terms of style, as I was excited by the idea of trying out digital watercolours in Photoshop. They were extremely fun, and while they probably doubled my time colouring, as I'd never really used them before, I think they gave the project a little bit more of a unique flair. I certainly want to toy with them more in future. I won't spoil the exacts of the scenes or their solutions quite yet, so I'll add that if you do want to play the game, it's available on our Patreon at any tier. It's super short, probably like 5 minutes in a first playthrough, but if you care, maybe toss us a coin or two and try it out. Then you too can marvel at the graveyard that is our update schedule. Hopping over to Dennis, our coder, his job on day one was to sort out the parallaxing screen effect I was dead set on for this project. It'll be better shown later, but I essentially wanted to have the screen slide a bit to favour the scene you're currently looking at, and to add a little bit of movement to the elements in said scene. So when you move to the left, for example, the people in the window on the right will notably move. And it's only now that I remember that that's not actually how it should be moving. They should be moving less because they're further back, goddammit Dennis. So I've just about finished scene 1 by the end of the first of the 3 days, separating the items onto separate layers to export individually, and we end the night with a girl screaming in what looks like a very dry street currently, along with some sort of art house Domino's pizza logo. Alright, day 2 begins with Dennis and I sleeping until way too late into the day, and finally beginning on our respective tasks, with me working on the scene for the boys half of the screen, and Dennis implementing the stuff I finished from the day prior, and getting the whole, pointing and clicking of this point and click game to work. Spoiler alert, he gets that done. What am I supposed to tell you? I don't know how to code, and me explaining how an object slowly disappears and does a bunch of invisible stuff behind the scenes isn't exactly interesting video material. Give me a break, man, I just have an art degree. Something I can kind of talk about is particle effects. Since the game was incredibly static as there was no animation, we opted instead for lots of small style points to try and bump it from an early 2000s Newground Flash game into something you might see on Steam and go, oh that's cute, and then proceed to not buy. The humiliatingly incorrect parallaxing being the first part of that, and the particle effects being the other half. So we made rain to finally give the girl something to be upset about besides her phone being out of battery. Classic Zoomers. We even added a very subtle detail of dripping parts and droplets hitting the glass as a cute bit of extra life to the scene. The other particle we added was little musical notes floating out of the headphones. This is to help them stand out as, spoiler alert, they are one of the hidden objects. Maybe that's why your phone's about to die, dummy. So eventually I finished the boys' side of the room as well. I was fond of the background, but wasn't too happy with the boy himself. Looks a little amateurish. That's why you use reference and don't try to be an animator before learning to draw, kids. But in all seriousness, currently the game is looking pretty close to functional. There's only a few more things to do in time for... Uh-oh, it's time to move now. At this point, Dennis has items disappearing when you click on them. But wait a minute, Zach, they're currently going off into the abyss. Looks like you need to make separate assets for them in the other scenes now. So I guess I'll go through the puzzle itself. So, here's a tutorial for a 5-minute game for those of you that are a bit too head empty to figure it out. There's essentially no order to 4 out of 5 of each side's objects. However, to keep those of you that can match the shape to the hole in one of those toddler toys on your toes, one of each of their items can only be found through a little extra work. Let's start with the boys' items and help the girls' rainy evening out. Obviously, we can start with the easy stuff, an umbrella to keep the rain off her, coat because it's cold, little wellies. Do people outside the UK call them wellies? Anyway, there's little rain boots in the corner to keep her tootsies dry. All pretty easy stuff so far. You'll also notice her phone battery blinking. It doesn't take an Einstein to figure out that his charger can be clicked in order to charge it. Bam, done. That's all you can do on his side for now, and as you can see, she's looking much better. Who knew the secret to happiness was burgling all of your partner's belongings? But we're not done here yet. Resetting again, we can try her side, which is less obvious as the boy's problems are a bit less clear. He's sad, so what stuff makes you feel better when you're sad? How about some music? That works, but the room looks a little drab. Let's rip those fairy lights down and give his room some mood lighting. Maybe he's a bit hungry, so she could send him a box of chocolates from the sweet store behind her. That's alright, but his room's a little messy. So we can click the garbage bin and whoa, all cleaned up. Now, what about his extra sneaky one? It's not obvious from the start, but after you help her charge her phone, the text bubble changes. Click on it and look at that. She sent him a sweet message. How cute. That's the boy's sad night in completely solved. But hold on, did you notice something change? I say, acting like this is an episode of Blue's Clues. Yes, when all the boy's items were found, his curtains were opened and his day got a little brighter. And it reveals the final piece of the puzzle. Clicking the car in the distance, a taxi finally arrives for our damsel in distress, and she can safely go home, in a vehicle with no easing or animation. We really were close to the edge at this point. Did I mention we didn't sleep between this day and the last? That's about 26 hours. So, throw in some rain, an ambient music track, some randomized dings for when you click on the correct items, and a slap together ending credit scene, and you have a game that's functional and on time. Honestly, I never thought I'd live to see the day. Usually our game jams have a little bit of post-editing to their trailers, like sound being added or me editing the cutscenes in. But this one, from start to finish, was all engine, so guess that's mission complete. But how did you like it though? I'd really enjoy hearing your thoughts, and that's not just the soulless parasocial relationship clout chaser version of me talking. It's not my favourite game jam we've made, that medal goes to Grim Repair, but it was honestly nice to try and express something a bit more genuine for a project. Not that I haven't been goofing on it this whole time, of course. Either way, it's been a nice distraction from all that hard work we're doing behind the scenes on other projects. Yep, lots of work being done on that. Not just overwhelmed with life and floundering creatively. Speaking of, if you'd like to see more of our work when it eventually comes out, please do consider following us. It's nice to know I'm not just screaming into the void, and the style of videos is only getting more defined as we go. We also have a Twitter that we generally post on when we have something geared up and readied, so consider that too. And if you really want to give us anxiety, consider joining our Patreon. We don't post often, so consider it more of a tip jar at the moment, but we truly do appreciate every kind soul who helps us feel like this stuff is really worth the effort. Speaking of, those kind souls are You Lose Some, Jesso Doodles, Natalie Layton, Venomous Squirrel, and as always, my mum. Thanks, Mum.